Welcome back, everybody, with another video. This one's going to follow kind of along the lines of the last few videos I did about breeding. I'm going to cover different aspects. Some of these are questions that people ask me from time to time. Some of these are things that I included or are bringing up within this same video. And it's just the way I do things and what my results have shown. Of course, everybody knows it's been listened to me. I learn from different people too, different species of animals, from people that are involved in horses, game fowl, agriculture, livestock, hunting stuff, hunting dogs, greyhounds, all kinds of stuff. Like I've said before, a lot of the aspects of breeding are across the board. And I'm here to answer some of those questions, or at least address things that have come up. Once again, nothing meant for legal purposes. This is all history, entertainment from the past, nothing current, not encouraging anything illegal. And it's based on knowledge, opinion, facts, different things like that should be part of in my belief anyways, when someone's giving advice, it's best that it comes from experience, personal experience. So to start off with, one of the things that always comes up is why do titled dogs or well-bred dogs, title meaning in the past meaning champions or grand champions, how come they don't produce, or why didn't they produce? The three main things that I've spoken on before when it comes to producing good individuals or being consistent with a family of dogs is it matters who has them, why they have them, what they do with them. Second thing it matters is how they're raised. Now they call that epigenetics. The third thing is sometimes breedings click, sometimes they don't. They just don't click. That happens. But to delve into it a little bit further, there's some reasons why, at least in my experience, and seeing other people's dogs and watching other breeders and doing research on other breeders, why well-bred dogs, titled dogs, don't produce. It could be one of those three factors, and one of the main factors in those three, as far as how they're raised, is nutrition and health. That plays a big factor in the productivity and avoiding genetic problems, mishaps, internal organ failure, or skin problems, hip dysplasia, cowhawks way back, all this stuff that we consider negatives within the breed, within our dogs. One of the things I want to address is, when you're breeding dogs, my standard was, and some of this stuff may be repetitive, but it's to make a point, is I followed the dogs that were consistent with the traits I wanted and were consistent with my family of dogs. I also followed litters, or used dogs from the litters of higher percentage individuals in the litter, meaning 50% or more, hopefully more. And it also proved to me, doing it that way, that the best dogs within that litter were the better producers. And there's a reason for that. First of all, the whole family is consistent. Second of all, the individuals you're using were based on performance. Their litter mates had performance. Their parents did too, and their parents were good producers, and the same with the grandparents. So if, in my case, if that criteria was not met, those criteria were not met, then I wouldn't breed them. But what I've seen repeatedly over and over that those criteria were not met with other dogs, and that could be one of the reasons why they don't produce, because they can't, because they don't have what it takes to, in their background and within themselves and along with their litter, to be able to be the type of individual that produces. Meaning, let's say you have one, there's a badass dog in the litter, he's the only one, all the litter mates quit, or you got one or two, but all the rest of them didn't pan out. That's one of the reasons why they won't produce. It's not in them to do that. Now, there's been several cases of individuals where they didn't have litter mates, or were not aware of their litter mates, or their litter mates are not well known, and they did produce. And in those cases, most of the time, the other criterion is met. Their parents and grandparents and their litter mates come from production, come from athleticism. So when you have an anomaly like that, a lot of times that's why they don't produce, because it's not in them to do so. And people can probably give a long list of dogs like that did produce, and a long list of dogs like that didn't produce. Well, when it happens that way, you're not seeing consistency. There's no consistency in hit and miss. So that's what's going to happen. You're going to hit and miss. Sometimes it depends on how you breed the dogs, what you're breeding them to, what you're bringing them in. So when you bring something new in, as I mentioned before, those dogs have to meet that criteria as well. They have to be a top shelf dog. They have to be from litters that are high percentage. Their parents and grandparents have to have that same criteria. In my opinion, that's the only way to do it. That's the only way it can be done. There's no reason for well-bred dogs that are athletic, that come from high percentage litters, where the parents and grandparents come from the same thing and have been proven to be producers, for that dog not to produce, other than it just can't produce. It doesn't click. And if you meet the other criteria of how you raise them, the epigenetics of them, and their nutrition, feed, and health, then you pretty much have all the bases covered. So you have to accept that, hey, sometimes dogs just don't produce. But to have a bunch of them that don't do that, there's a glitch in there somewhere that people are not taking into consideration. So and another factor is and I'll get into this other part a little bit later on about what to call your dogs. You know, your blood, that blood, Carver blood, Bolio, Boudreaux, Eli, whatever it is. But sometimes you'll see, and it's been mentioned a lot of other times, or you'll see it yourself, that someone will get dogs from a particular breeder, and they don't have the same results as that breeder did. There could be a couple of reasons for that too. That breeder has a knack for breeding. He knows what he's doing. But as of lately, what a lot of people are saying is because of fake peds and unknown pedigrees, and the dog's not being bred the way they are, and you don't have the recipe, and they're keeping something from you. In my experience, none of that matters. If they come from good dogs, from a breeder, and something goes south with them, it's the person that has them generally. In all honesty, I never thought I needed somebody's recipe to do something where if I know how to breed, I can do it myself. I didn't have to do what Carver did, but within that also, when you do produce good dogs, whether they're Carver or someone else's, there's going to be a lot of the same things that you're doing that he did, that you may not even realize he did it, other than seeing it on paper. And that's the whole nature of the breed that's been shown over and over again. It didn't matter who the dogs came from. If they were good breeders and the person that got them knew how to breed dogs, that stuff was going to continue. And if you're not consistent with that, it's going to fall off. And if you're not breeding the right way and not choosing the right individuals, it's going to go to the wayside. So it's one thing to say, I have Carver dogs, and it's another thing to say, I have Carver bred dogs. Because unless you got them from Carver, you don't have Carver dogs. Because there's no way of telling whether Carver would even bred the way you bred or would even use the individuals that you use. But if they come from him or they come from Bolio, and we all make those mistakes, it's not intentional a lot of times. People just ask, what blood you got? I got Carver dogs. But you always have to keep in mind that what you're doing is your own decisions. You're making your own family of dogs. So at some point, you're going to have to start calling them your dog. Whatever kennel name you use or whatever last name you use or whatever you consider them, your name has to be in front of them at some point. Whether it catches on or not, that's what they are. Because a lot of these names that we use now, the same thing back then, they weren't using those names back then. They didn't call Klaus dogs until he was in an advanced age and after he passed away. Because he got dogs from different people. He had OFRN dogs, he had Wallace dogs, he had Colby dogs, he had all these different ones. And Howard Heinzel put it in a letter he wrote one time. Someone asked him, what are Klaus dogs? And then he gave a list of where Klaus got a lot of his dogs from. And he was around Klaus, and it was no diss on Klaus. It's just what people were using to call those dogs from Klaus. Meaning he hadn't been breeding long enough for them to be called Klaus dogs, because even the current ones he was using at the time were from other people. So until you establish your own family of dogs for 3 or 4 generations, you have to at least say these are that guy's bred dogs. These are Eli bred dogs. And when you do establish your own family of dogs, they're going to be called yours. And you should be proud of that. That's the point you should want to get to at some point. So I would say give yourself 3 or 4 generations to do that. And you've established a family of dogs that are consistent with the traits that you like and how you want their temperament and behavior and athleticism and structure and all those things involved with breeding dogs. So that is something that came up also. And one of the ways to get consistency is breeding dogs that have similar traits. And I'll give this extreme example. There was a female one time, and she was starting her schooling, right? This particular family of dogs, they were known to be early starters. They were known to be high-strung, scratch hard, scream in the corner. That was consistent with that particular family of dogs, and other things too that are strong and fast, and rough, all this stuff. So there was a female, and she was young, and the person tried to start her. She really didn't want to start. She kind of freaked out, so he put her up. Waited a couple of 3 months later, tried to start her again. She fussed a little bit, then she got started, and she was doing good. And even scratched hard, raring to go. And then a few minutes later, she started acting funky again and weird, letting go of holds. So what do? Let's scratch them and see. Took her back to the corner. She's raring to go, screaming all like that. Boom, she goes. So we put her up. We'll try her again later, see if she comes out of that funkiness. So they do her again. Same thing. She starts kind of funky. When she gets mad or whatever, boom, she hits it again. But again, during the roll, she's acting weird sometimes, letting go of holds and standing there out of hold. Take her back to the corner, she scratches good. Now, some of those traits were consistent with the blood, meaning in the corner, raring to go, hollering and screaming. Cut her loose, no hesitation. But during the action, she would do this funky stuff. So the person asked me, would you breed a dog like that? She's well bred within a family of dogs that have been bred for generation after generation. Would you breed her? I said, no. He said, why? I said, because she's not consistent with the blood. She has some of the traits. She's showing good signs in some things, other things she's not, and that's not consistent with the blood. They don't do that. Them dogs don't come out of hold. They don't lose interest. And the other thing is, I asked, do her littermates do that? No. They all fired up. They all do good, all that. Then why would you breed her when you have other ones, especially? And even if you didn't have other ones, let's say she was the only one in the litter, why would you keep her? She's the only one, and some of her behavior are not consistent with your family of dogs, and she makes those funky moves. So my advice at that time was not to use her, not to breed her. And I told him maybe you finish her out and she does good. I don't remember what happened to her, but I said maybe she ends up being good. Gets rid of all that funky shit later on, and you can hook her up, compete with her. He goes, yeah. I said, that would be something I would do if she proved that later on. But I still wouldn't breed her because she had those funky traits there in her. And she might throw that. And just something as simple as that could throw your whole family of dogs off, at least the dogs coming from her, because they don't do that. That's how meticulous and particular you have to be with your dogs, in my opinion, to get the consistency. If dogs are doing, even if they're good dogs, when they're finished out, if they have these funky behaviors or something you don't like, why would you put them in your program? When you have other ones just as good or better, and some of them not as good maybe, but they don't do that funky stuff. And I use one of my dogs as an example, a very good dog, Clayton Blood. He didn't have the style of my dogs. He didn't have much mouth. He was extremely game. He was extremely fast. Had the best air on any dog that I ever seen before him and since him. And he was very intelligent. But he wasn't consistent with my family of dogs, so I never bred him. He won in an hour 39 and 2:43. Other people liked him. Maybe other people wanted to breed to him, and I would have let him probably if they asked me. But for those reasons, even though he was a good dog that beat good competition, and if he had survived, he would have won more, I'm sure. Or at least I would have tried to see if he could have. I think he could have. He was that type of individual. But he didn't follow the family traits of my dogs, and he didn't have some of the traits that I didn't like. So I kept him out of my breeding program. And that's what you have to do with your family of dogs to keep them consistent. And even if you're bringing in outside blood, they have to be consistent in certain ways. For me, it was always better if I threw a cross in, that cross had similar traits as my stuff, including style and temperament, behavior, certain things about them, bone structure. That was some of the things that I made sure that they had also, even though it was totally different blood. Because there's only so many styles dogs have. There's only so many traits they have. So if you had in the past, if you had a rough type of dog or something like that, and you wanted to throw some smarts in them, and maybe you put some Boleo in them or or something else that you consider as intelligent or whatever, to add those traits to your stuff, which is different from totally changing your bloodline, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's an effective tool to use in breeding. It's an effective way of breeding. But you could add something that your dogs don't have. Could be one thing, two things, three things. But other traits they have, your dogs have them also. Let's say it's something like scratching hard. So this dog may be a head dog, maybe, and if it's a head dog, I prefer offensive head dogs. Clayton Blood was a defensive type. That's another reason I didn't like that particular trait about him. If it was offensive and he had more mouth, maybe I would have bred him, but it was defensive. So you bring Blood in, it's offensive type, but a different style. They do fight rough when the opportunity arises, but they're smart enough where they work that head or work that muzzle or the bottom jaw or something like that. That would be one way of adding something that's different than your blood, but being consistent with your stuff as far as temperament and behavior is concerned, because they scratch hard. As opposed to something, maybe he's real rough and he's strong, has a lot of mouth, but he scratches slow or he walks over. That's something that I didn't like. So because of that, that's a trait that I didn't want. I wouldn't include that type of dog in my breeding program, even though he was a hard biter. Because in my mind, I'm always thinking, I can produce hard biters that don't walk their scratches. And when you're talking with people, sometimes they'll say, well, what about this dog? Well, what about Zebo? And what about Art? And what about this? And what about that? Those are anomalies. Those are freaks of nature. So even if you include a slow walking, hard biting dog into your program, he may throw hard biting dogs, maybe not as hard as him, but biting hard enough. But he also may throw that slow walking, scratching trait. Now, does that slow walking, scratching trait, is that on the way to quitting? I don't know. Because there's plenty of dogs that did scratch hard, and later on in the show, they didn't scratch at all. And that's the way it is with any trait. And I'll get into that a little bit too, is the particular traits that you like do not mean the dogs are going to be game. So we talk about work ethic, prey drive, finish. They're all good traits, but they're not gameness. Work ethic, I just like that because I don't like lazy dogs, or I don't like dogs that I can't teach to work my key. I didn't. And I like them to have that spirit and that ability to want to get out there and be able to do certain physical things and have the intelligence to learn whatever it is you're trying to teach them. And dogs that have high spirit means they want to get out there and hump it. Whether they're walking, whether it's a treadmill or flirt pole or spring pole, they understand the work and they want to do it and they enjoy it. And you have to stop them before they push themselves too hard, because they will push themselves too hard. As opposed to a lazy dog that doesn't want to learn or only does certain things or doesn't have the intelligence to understand what you're trying to teach it or what you're exposing it to, and it's just stubborn and straightforward and even slow-minded or slow-moving. Those are not the type of dogs I prefer. And in some cases, you know, it's like when you talk about a certain trait like mouth. Mouth is one of those things that most people are impressed by. And some people, it may not be the first thing on their list, but there isn't anybody that I can think of that wasn't grateful to have mouth in their dogs. And some people become so obsessed with it, and not just mouth, it could be other traits too. It could be air, it could be strength, and because mouth is impressive. But whatever trait it is, and I just use mouth because that's what everybody, that's the most impressive trait of a bulldog that people will say, other than gameness. Gameness should always be number one. I don't care what anybody says, but that should be at the top of the list. And it's anybody's interpretation as to where that falls within their dogs. But for me, that's first and foremost. And it should always be kept in your dogs. And if you breed dogs that have gameness, you have more of a chance of getting it than using dogs that don't have it. Well, when it comes to mouth or any other trait that you chase or you key on too heavily, you're going to lose other aspects of your dogs, other positive things with your dogs. That could be nature, it could be chance, it could be whatever it is, but that just seems the way that it falls. And again, you see that with, where I've seen it is not so much with a particular breeder that has a family of dogs, that mouth may be very important in his family of dogs, but I see it more that with people that got those hard mouth dogs from this particular breeder and then started losing other aspects of the dogs. And it's because they're trying so hard to keep that mouth in there, and they may keep it in there, that they lose other benefits of the dog. And that's kind of generational. It happens that way. But you can't key on any one trait too much, or you're going to lose other good traits. That's just the way it goes. Even if you rely too much on air, you want air, you're going to start getting too thin-boned dogs. Because one of the things of physics that helps them have good air is their weight, their density, put it that way. It's hard to have thick, heavy muscles and thick, heavy bones on a dog and expect it to have good air, especially at a fast pace over distance. You may see what you consider good air on a slow dog or a slow-paced dog, and they can go a long time, but they're not moving very fast because their density of their muscles and their bones don't allow them to move too fast. They could be strong as hell, but they're not very fast. Whereas a dog that doesn't have those big heavy muscles and not so dense bones can move at a faster pace and still retain that good air. So that's one of the main reasons why someone gets a dog from a breeder and they start losing it, whereas the breeders kept it going for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, whatever years. And you start seeing a decline in the dogs you got from that breeder. Is because you're not keeping certain standards. And again, in my opinion, don't have nothing to do with the recipe. Who cares what the recipe is? They're bulldogs. You should know how to breed them no matter how they're bred. Doesn't matter. Because if there's so many fake peds and so many unknown and all this stuff that people say, then all the dogs have incorrect breeding. But yet a good breeder can take that and still make good dogs and keep his family of dogs straight and keep his information straight. So I never bought into that. You have to have the recipe. You have to do it like he did. No, you don't. You can make your own way. And that's what you're trying to do with your own family of dogs anyways. Establish your own stuff. Do it your way. And be honest with yourself. And base everything on athleticism, performance, and the results of those breedings that you made. So again, that's one of the main reasons why certain dogs don't produce, It's not in him to do that. Like I said, it could be he just can't produce. The genes don't come together right. Stuff just don't click. But those are rare cases too. There's no reason why a performing dog that has litter mates that were the same way, parents and grandparents were the same way, shouldn't be able to produce, other than the fact that maybe it's a health issue, maybe it's a nutrition issue, or he's an anomaly himself. He doesn't have the backing in him to do so. There's no reason why, because there's too many dogs using those standards that have been consistent over time, and families of dogs that have been consistent over time that regularly put out good dogs. You're always going to have some that aren't worthy. Don't breed those. That's another way of getting that consistency, because the ones you are breeding have all those good traits and are able to pass them on. It's that simple. So rather than continually asking why this happened, why did that happen, you need to recognize why certain things happen and don't follow those individuals, and go with the ones that have proven themselves to be good ones and the ability to produce as well. So again, I was just going through my notes that I had. These are some of the things that came up. Key things to remember, especially if you're just starting to breed, you're not that familiar with it. You want dogs from a reputable breeder. You want their living environment and your preventative maintenance to be at a high level. The nutrition has to be a well-rounded diet, also at a high level. And I don't mean in terms of high level as, 30% protein and 25% fat or anything like that. What I mean is good food, a balanced diet. That's first and foremost. Then they need some type of regular exercise. It doesn't have to be a lot. Then your dogs need to see where they're at as far as work ethic and prey drive and intelligence, things like that, moving up into adulthood. And then you need to follow the litters that have the higher percentages. And if you do that, even if you're starting out, now the dogs you breed, they follow that criteria, they have those standards. As you move forward, they're going to be the parents that have all that criteria. And then they're going to be the grandparents that have all that criteria. And then the great-grandparents that have all that criteria. And then as you move forward, the influence from those dogs in the back, it's not going to be there anymore. Their individual influence, their particular genetic, what they're throwing, right? But if you're using offspring and progeny that have the same consistency and the same traits, those traits are going to carry forward. So even though that particular dog 10 generations back has no influence on the dogs you have today in your hands, the ones you have today in your hands are going to have similar traits than that dog 10 generations back, because you've consistently moved forward with them. And the individuals you're using have similar traits. That's how it works. And that's how you keep those traits going. And you can add something, and if you add something totally different and it helps improve your dogs, you can keep those traits in there too. Again, speaking of the past, it may be something your dogs are rough and fast and strong. They hit here and hit there. But now you've added a little bit more pit intelligence to them. And they would go to the muzzle or the face or the bottom jaw, something like that. Still have those other traits, but now you've included another side to them that makes your dogs better. That's where you see improvement. In today's world, it's the same thing. It's just a different aspect of the breed. Whether it's illegal sports or hunting, you may want your animals, if you're hunting raccoons or varmints or coyotes or whatever, you may want them to dispatch them in a certain part of their body. You can teach dogs that do that, and then you can breed dogs that do that, and you'll have that consistency. Or you may want to breed your dogs to be a certain size only. You like them on the smaller side, you like them in the mid-range, you like them on the larger side. You can do that. You can teach dogs over time to be bred for weight pool, bred for treadmill race, bred for wall climbing, and that'll include certain structures and certain behaviors and temperaments, the way they think. So the pit bull doesn't have to go away in that respect. There's all kinds of traits and all things that it's good for. It's just a matter of the breeder knowing how to breed dogs and how to get what he wants out of them. And then using the individuals that represent all those traits and behaviors and structure and muscle and bone and teeth, and use those for breeding. So I'm not sure what I'm going to call this video. It'll be up when we post it. But once again, thanks. If you have any comments, put them in the comment section. We'll have a good convo.